Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Off the Rak, conversations on transformative leadership with yours truly, Walt Rakowich. And if you're new to the show, I'm just really happy that you could join us this month. And so on a monthly basis, I host conversations with some of the most thoughtful voices guiding leaders to be more human and more influential in their workplace environments. And I'm joined today by Dan O'Dowd and Clint Hurdle, two good friends of mine, and both icons in the world of baseball. First, a little bit about Clint. Clint played in the big leagues for over 10 years with Kansas City Royals, New York Mets, Cincinnati Reds, and St. Louis Cardinals. From 2002 to 2009, he was manager of the Colorado Rockies, taking them to the World Series in 2007. And then he managed my beloved Pittsburgh Pirates from 2011 to 2019, where he was named manager of the league, of the National League, I should say, manager of the year in 2013. And one of the coolest things about Clint is that he believes in the power of influence. In 2009, he started sending daily emails to 12 of his closest friends. And that email chain has now grown to over 7,000 people, of which I'm one of them. So Clint, thank you for your inspiration every day. Thank you for your encouragement. And it's great to have you on.
You're welcome, Walt. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. As for Dan O'Dowd, he started in the front office with the Baltimore Orioles in 1983 with GM Hank Peters. And what a time to join the Orioles as they won the World Series that year. And then Dan went on to work for the Cleveland Indians in baseball operations, player development side of the business. And in 1999, he started a 15-year career with the Colorado Rockies as GM and eventually president of the club. And today you can watch Dan on the MLB network, where he does a terrific job of speaking his mind and drawing on his experiences to provide really, really insightful commentary. Dan, great to have you on today too.
Yeah, Walt, great to be with you, and just awesome to be with Clint.
Because you guys were together. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a question or two. But before I get started, I got to ask both of you this very, very important question, at least in my mind. In your humble opinion, what is the best baseball park in the major league and why?
Go ahead, Clint. You got this one.
From a playing standpoint, I still have two. I don't have one. Anytime I can go to Wrigley Field, anytime I can go to Fenway Park, for me, that's as good as it gets. As I walk into the second part of my uniformed career, from a managerial experience, I'd be hard-pressed to say there weren't two more beautiful ballparks than the one I was fortunate enough to work in Coors Field and in PNC Park. When the sun starts to set at PNC over those three rivers, and those reflections come off those buildings, it's breathtaking. So I guess I really kind of completely hatchet job the first question, because I've thrown four ballparks today.
That's all right.
Yeah, my memory is usually tied to how we played in ballparks, and none of them were very good. So I'm just going to pick out the aesthetic ballpark that I was a part of. And I'm not playing to you, Walt, or Clint here, but I mean, I love Coors Field. I think it's with the mountains silhouetted in the background, the beautiful temperatures, but there's nothing like the ballpark in Pittsburgh. A night game in Pittsburgh when the bridge is lit up is absolutely spectacular. Now, Clint will tell you a couple times they wondered if I didn't jump off that bridge walking back from the ballpark, specifically after we blew a 5-run lead one night and Clint got thrown out the next day at home plate before that game even got started. But the ballpark in Pittsburgh, it's just, there's something about it with the color combination and how the bridge is lit up with the city silhouetted in the background is just magnificent.
Wow, that's great. And by the way, if that would have happened, maybe your statue would have been up there next to Roberto Clemente and Willie Stargell.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe some flowers. That's about it.
Well, I love PNC Park too, and I was fortunate enough to live in both Boston and Chicago and go to both Fenway and Wrigley. They're outstanding parks as well. And of course, I'm in Colorado here, so Coors Field is definitely. I've been there many times. It's a beautiful park too. But let's stay on the Rockies a little bit, of course, Field. And something that is near and dear to both of your hearts, I'm sure. I want to take you back to 2007 when the Rockies won 14 of their last 15 regular season games, forced the tiebreaker with the Padres to get into the playoffs, which you guys won. And then you went on to rip off 7 straight playoff games on your way to the World Series. Clint, you were the manager of the team. Dan, you were GM. I'd like you guys to just share your emotions a little bit about, what you were thinking at the time and actually looking back on it now. How does that feel? I mean, it just winning 21 out of 22 games to get to the World Series is just a feat that no one's ever done. And I'm kind of curious on your emotions now, looking back on it.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear Clint's point of view on this one because I'm anxious to hear his emotion.
I don't think anybody saw that coming. I think what I've held on to and what I noticed going into the season was a couple things happened before the 07 season. Number one, it was the way the 06 season ended with Aaron Cook throwing a complete game at Shea, us walking off. The whole team came out on the field to congratulate Aaron Cook. It had been a hard year, a learning year, but I think a year built around cohesion for our core group of players. And that last game was kind of just, I think everybody went out. They weren't just handshaking, they were hugging each other. It's like, we finished. We're better. We're going to be better. So I walked out the door holding on to that thought. And then as Dan will tell you, the 07 winner, the 6-7 winner, that was the one where we actually had trade conversations about Todd Helton with Boston. And it got to the point where, I think Todd and Dan would know better, but they all got together. And Todd said, you guys do what you want. This is Todd's version of me. I'd really like to stay. It wouldn't mean anything to win in Boston like it would mean to win something in Colorado. As that team was morphing into a young team with some core players in place that had won together before, Todd was, I think, the piece that first went out front and just said, hey, I want to be here. I want to be a part of this. I want to make it happen. So then we walk in the season. And as Dan will tell you, we muddled through the season, not in a bad way, but we were never cold and we were never hot. We played around 500 the whole year. And I'll tell you this, that Dan's got a lot of strengths, but one of the lightning points that he would continue to share with me when he goes, we haven't got hot yet. We haven't been hot yet. And he was true. It was accurate. We had not gotten hot. We had the players and pitchers to do something. It just had never happened. But I can remember the rock bottom point was in that month of September, probably sometime in the second week before we got hot, that we had blown a lead and a reporter just put me to task saying, you guys are done. What do you tell the players? There's nothing left. You can't, you're out of it. And I just looked at him and asked him, I said, what would you tell your kid if he was on this team? Would you tell him just quit, go home? I said, you got to find a backbone. You got to find a funny bone. You got to find a wishbone. You got to find a bone, and you got to keep playing because you never know what's going to happen. And I even used Dan's line. I said, we still haven't gotten hot. They all laughed at me, but 2 days later we started getting hot. And I think the point was for me that we were steadfast. It's a sailing term, but we were steadfast throughout the year. Dan never overreacted. He didn't unreact. He was proactive in our moves. I've never felt more of being in a learning environment than I was with Dan. He took a young guy that had never managed in the major leagues and trusted him and poured into him. He put good people around me, but I had good staff and the players. But it was just for me to watch it all unfold. It's kind of like you're a dad and you're in the backyard watching your kids play. And they just keep getting better and better, and they just keep getting winning. And I just kept reminding myself, stay out of the way.
That's great. I mean, that is so well said, Walt. For me, it was very similar. And what's interesting about Clint's role and my role is that, first of all, in an organization, it's the hardest role to manage for both Clint and for myself because you see the game from totally different perspectives. Clint sees the game from a vantage point of a dugout that's on an angle towards home plate, and his singular focus night in, night out is how do I win that game? I'm sitting up in a box and I'm watching the entire field and I'm looking for incremental improvement anywhere I can see, trying to keep the big picture in mind, but also wrapped up in the win and losses of that night. So it's marrying those two points of view on a consistent basis through the course of the year. I made a lot of good decisions in Colorado. I made a lot of bad decisions in Colorado, but one of the greatest decisions I ever made was hiring Clint. Difficult in letting Buddy Bell go because Buddy and I had a very close personal relationship in Cleveland that just didn't translate in Colorado for a variety of different reasons. And I actually had no doubt Clint was the right person to hire for that role. Now, I can tell you, I don't know why I felt that way at the time. Now I realize it was a God thing. I just wasn't mature enough in my journey of faith to understand nudging and open doors. But I had such a strong conviction that Clint was the right person for a variety of different reasons. And the reason I say that hiring was perfect for that year. Clint said it so well. We made some awful signings, some of my bad decisions in Hampton and Nagel in the end of 2000, going into 2001. We started a complete rebuild of the organization at the major league level in 2002, but also included what was going on in scouting and development too. And so like we went through some lean years. We went through years in 04 and 05 where we lost 94, 95 games. But 06, we can begin to see the tide begin to turn just a little. And Clint might have thought I was steadfast in 07. I was panicking in 07, quite honestly, because I was very frustrated in the play of our club. As Clint said it so well, we had some good periods and bad periods. We were very, very vanilla. And, on, what was it, September 16th, I think we were sitting at 76, 72. And we had a doubleheader against the Dodgers. We won the first game. We went to the nightcap. We were down in the nightcap. And Clint, I don't remember the name of the Japanese closer that we just never even got a base off of that year, never mind a run. Sasaki, or I don't remember
Kaito.
Exactly his Kaito. And Helton went deep. Walk off home run. We swept a doubleheader, and I had unbelievable goosebumps, which I now realize was a God thing too. What's crazy about this story, and Clint, I'm sure will remember this. I pulled into my parking lot the next morning and I got a call from Kelly McGregor. And he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I just pulled into the lot." He goes, "Well, I just want to share with you, we're about to go on the most unbelievable run of your career, so you better buckle up." And I went how, what are you talking about? He goes, "You'll see." I had a conversation with God, and I'm not kidding you, Walt. This is honest to God truth. And Clint, you probably remember this. He said, everything that we've been hoping for, it's going to happen, because the one thing this club has more than anything else, Dan, is we have the most powerful emotion known to mankind, is that our players love one another. And it's about to come out. And I'll be darned, man, he was prophetic, because at that point in time, it came out for me, it was just a surreal ride at that point in time. And again, Clint was the perfect person for that role. And so hiring Clint, I understood completely now why I had such a strong intuition to do that, because he was so authentic in who he was. He completely captured a relationship with the group and the culture of the group to get them to love each other the way he was loving them. And, and I still believe that we didn't have a 10-game layoff and the Indians actually won the darn series when they were up 3-0, we would have won a World Series that year in Colorado. So Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what, Clint, you talked about being steadfast, but yet trusting and sometimes even staying out of the way, which from a leadership perspective, that's the hardest thing for us to do. And then when you bring the love into it all, it's just amazing what you can accomplish. I want to talk a little bit about team dynamics. Can we stay on that topic a little bit? It just seems to me that putting a winning baseball team together is pretty tough. I mean, you've got players all over the world, You got some from cities, some from rural areas. Some don't even speak English. Some have college degrees, some don't. And they're all in their 20s and 30s trying to learn what life is all about, right? I mean, that's tough. And so, Dan, let me start with you. I'm kind of curious, what did you look for when you were drafting and trying to assemble a team? And how did you prepare your players, if you could, to be leaders off the field as well?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Walt, that was a lifelong learning process for me. I can honestly still tell you I'm still learning it. But because failure is the greatest teacher in the world, as we all know, because we had some drafts early on in my tenure there weren't good. And so it was a chance to take a step back because fortunately I had an ownership group that was supportive of me and really reflect on things we need to get better on. And it became another very clear to me. So any idea that came to me, I now realize was a God thing, was that we need to get better in the why and the how. And very simply, that was from a scouting perspective. We had a scouting criteria of what we liked and didn't like with players. And the goal of that criteria was to simplify everything. In a game that can become so complex that you can overthink everything, from a hitting standpoint, from a position player standpoint, I just want guys that can hit. Like, I don't care about their position. I don't care about their athleticism. I don't care. Just find me guys that have the innate ability to hit. Clint and I can walk in a ballpark today. We can watch a group of 15 guys play, 15 other team, 30, and we can pick out the hitters within 10 minutes. And so to me, that was the simplest way to find players. That's the why. Why do you like a player? The how became the difficult part. How did they become the way that they became? Because every player, like every one of us, is a byproduct of their life experience. And you talked about it, Walt. What they were raised in, what they were exposed to created blessings and baggage. So once we took that player and he transitioned into our player development system, the job of the player development staff is to create as an authentic relationship with each player under their domain, to be able to take the gifts he was giving in an individual player plan and maximize those blessings, but to dig in on the baggage and get him to face the fears that he was living his life with in an attempt to turn. I had players grouped into three categories: impact, contributors, and value players. Keep the impact guys impact, try to make the contributor guys impact, try to take the value players and make them contributors. But at the very least, we wanted a better person leaving our organization than the one coming into our organization if they happen not to play in the big leagues for us. And so it wasn't the job of the player development staff to evaluate the player. It was the job for the player development staff to turn that player into a whole person in every aspect of their life, which I thought would give Clint a fighting chance to create the culture, because it starts with the fabric qualities of the heart with the player, to create the culture that he wanted at the big league level. And then I'll let him take it from there as relates to the challenge of trying to create a culture of one at the major league level, which I think is the hardest job that a manager has to do.
Clint, thoughts on that?
Well, again, I was fortunate and the recipient of a lot of work that had already been done. Our minor league system got a whole lot better. In the last few years, I was the hitting coach, and while we were doing hard year in, year out in Colorado, our minor league system was starting to blossom and flourish, and we were growing some boys into men and some young men into potential leaders. Once they were able to get some footing at the major league level, it was, for me, it all goes back. It actually started in with three questions I had in 8th grade, and I'd had this in my pocket for years and had never used it. But the timing, as Dan has already said, the timing was from God. Because when I was in 8th grade, I was trying to play basketball. I played 3 sports, but it was the first time in my life where I was more interested in being the GM of our 8th grade team than being a player on it, because I wasn't getting enough playing time. And I couldn't understand this coach's mentality. He's not playing me enough. We've got a problem here. So I can remember one day going home and whining to my father. And my father, as my father always has, 89 years into it now, he listened. And he said, "Well, it sounds like you're talking to the wrong guy, son. Why don't you put those big boy pants, go down and talk to your coach." Okay, 8th grade, I'm going to go walk in a coach's office and share the fact that he's mishandling my playing time. And it got to the point where the coach and I just go, he told me why I wasn't playing more. And I go, okay. I said, can I trust you? First question. And these were the questions that I had to answer for every player I felt and coach that came up to our major league team. Number one, can I trust you? And he looked at me and goes, what do you mean? And I wanted to say, hey, you're the teacher here. I'm an 8th grade student. What do you mean? Can I trust you? You can't understand that? Can I trust you? I said, Coach, and his name was Kruczewski, but it wasn't Kruzewski. It was Coach K. I said, Coach K, you told me what I need to work on. Can I trust you that that's what I really need to work on? He's trying to get me out the door. He goes, no, son, you need to improve there. I said, well, okay. Will you help me? Do you care enough about me to help me? And can you make me better? So it was, can I trust you? Can you make me better? And do you care about me? Were the 3 questions I had for him. He answered them. We went on to work something out. Did I ever play as much as I thought I should have? No. I played more because I got better. The other sports came to me naturally. Basketball, I was a get on the floor guy. I was throw an elbow guy. I was take a foul or give a foul guy. I was a backboard guy. So I had to dig things out more in basketball than I did baseball, football. But those 3 questions, that year, I wanted our players, I wanted to earn their trust. Because I know this from all the years of coaching. No player will ever let you coach them up until they trust you. I never did. Never. Once they trust you, there's no telling where that dynamic can go and what they will do for you, but most importantly for the team and their teammates. And then when you can show them that you care about them, as Dan just said, holistically, outside of being a player, that, he's a utility infielder with a 4-arm. He's got 6 back control. He's got 5 speed. When you get out of the numbers and you put a heartbeat to them and find out their coins, where they live, did they have any hobbies? Did they grow up in a single family home? You put the puzzle together, you have a much better understanding of your player where they know you care about them more than just the X's and the O's and, the 1 for 4s and the 0 for 3s and the complete game, whatever the numbers tell you. And then the fact that we've earned that trust, opportunities the game will provide for you to coach them and to help them get better. Because every player is looking for somebody. And in today's society, more than ever, it can be in their game, outside. They're looking for somebody to help them get better. So it was the culmination of those 3 questions, sharing those with my staff, me committing myself to the staff and told them I wanted to answer those questions for them first. So then we could all answer those 3 questions for our players next. And I think it took not an entire year. It continued to evolve throughout the months. Our players, they fell in love with one another. They fell in love playing ball for one another.
Right.
And nobody cared who got the credit. And that became the force multiplier. As we all know, there's so much cool stuff that can get accomplished when nobody cares who gets the credit versus people trying to tag things or take ownership of things. And that was the cool part for me. And I'll finish with this. I got some great advice along the way from our strength and conditioning coach, Brad Andrews. And because I didn't have everything figured out. I mean, I started managing in 2002. I'm 45 years old. He said, there comes a point in time, Clint, it's kind of like teaching your kid how to drive. You get in the front seat, you put on a helmet, 3 seat belts, and you're working the brake and the gas over the passenger side while they're driving? Or do you just get in the back seat, throw them the keys and say, hey, take me for a ride? And that's basically the point I tried to get to that year. Was I just threw the keys to the club and said, hey, take us for a ride. Let's see where you go.
Walt, I know your next question's on culture, but this conversation, the way Clint answered it, ties into culture. The one thing Clint is skipping, the reason he had the impact on the clubhouse the way that he did is probably, for me, he's got many gifts, but the one gift that I reflect upon that changed my life more than any other gift, and I try to pass that on down to everybody that I get a chance to impact in any small way, is the gift of vulnerability. Clint has the most incredible life story. Like, you should just do a podcast, like a month-long podcast just on Clint's life story, which is like way better than my life story. But his ability to express vulnerability, players will not trust someone when the person that's trying to get them to trust, or even any employee in any business, does not absolutely put their own dirty laundry out there openly to discuss why they are on the journey they're on. Once they do that, it disarms all the baggage that a player brings. And because Clint showed vulnerability, he created the most impactful tool in a culture. Like, everybody has a culture by design or by default: a family, a home, a business, a church, and a baseball team. You don't talent your way into a good culture. That's impossible. Just look at the San Diego Padres this year. That is done brick by brick, but it starts with a leader that's got the ability to communicate vulnerability, which in turn gets each player to talk about their fears. And then they talk about it with one another. And then that vulnerability allowed him to throw the keys. But what he did throw the keys to was a young shortstop who came up, and a culture's created inside the walls of a clubhouse. When you have a couple players, in this case, we had one. I mean, Todd was a great player. Matt Holliday was a great player, but we had one player that had a total intolerance of anything that got in the way of winning. I mean, anything. And that either rubbed people the right way or that rubbed people the wrong way. But it was Clint's vulnerability with his humility to say, oh my God, man, like, I'm just going to let this dude, dish it out and take it and stir it and let it go. I'm getting goosebumps when I talk about it, because we've never had this dude in our clubhouse, and that was Tulowitzki. And we didn't even know that when we drafted him either. Trust me, we knew his ability. We didn't know the intangibles. But Clint handled him absolutely perfectly, because another manager with ego involved would have never let him, as a young player, walk into our clubhouse and have the impact that that dude had on our club, which created this chemistry. Like, the reason why chemistry is not talked about in the business world and in our game is because there's no algorithm that you can write for it or data that you can collect around it, but you can smell it when it's there and when it's not. The chemistry that we had on our club when you walk through the doors of our clubhouse was overwhelming. It was incredible. I mean, I never duplicated it again in my career, quite honestly. It's really that hard to do. So I just want to make sure I follow up. And the other reason our culture was so good is because Clint was an incredible communicator. And when you communicate well, you create trust. When you trust, you communicate. When you communicate, you trust. It's this flywheel. And then the other thing that he did exceptionally well that came directly from Kelly McGregor to both of us, he took everything one day at a time. He never got beyond the 24 hours within that given day. And then he showed up the next day, and no matter what happened the day before, it had no effect on the day we were in, the present moment we were in. So I know we had those two topics tied together. I just want to jump in on the culture part of it, because culture is not something you fall into. Culture you got to work at every day. Like Clint, I'd say this all the time to Clint. I go, you tired? And he goes, no. I said, good, because you can't take a day off. Like, dude, you can't. Like, your job is to show up every day, and you got to put out the fires. You got to deal with the baggage, and you got to lead. I can take a day off. I can hide. You can take a day off, and you got 6 months off coming up at the end of the year. But right now, you can't take a day off. It's exhausting to do what a person in Clint's job has to do year in and year out. So anyway, sorry I got on a roll there.
No, that is really, really well said, Dan. And in many respects, actually everything you mentioned are things that I think are applicable in the business world today as well. I mean, they really, really are. Can we? I'd like to focus a little bit on this issue of vulnerability, though, because leaders, in my view, often face situations where they got to make tough decisions, and they may not be popular decisions. So put yourself in a vulnerable position now. Can either of you remember a decision that you had to make, or perhaps it was a season that challenged you, and where you had to make some tough decisions and maintain trust in your organization and try to keep morale as high as it could be?
Yeah, I'll go first here on this one. The toughest decision I've ever had to make in my career deals with the guy on the other side of this call. Is that when the decision organizationally was made to replace Clint in early of 2009, it was the most emotionally challenging decision that I was ever faced with. But I've never really explained why, and I like to today. Is that because I had been racked with guilt about that decision from the moment it was met to every day of my life. And it was because, and Clint doesn't even know this story, when I took the Rockies job in 2000, late 99 going into 2000, in my mind, it was going to be a 10-year job, that I was not going to do the job beyond 10 years. I was a director of player development with the Indians, and we had a AAA team in Colorado Springs. And so I had a little bit of experience of dealing with climatic altitude conditions where I had no idea that they were as challenging as what they were once I got into the job. I mean, literally, I was overwhelmed by the challenges that were in the job. So I had made my mind up that at the end of the '09 season, I was done. Like I was going to, whatever the situation was, I was going to move on and try to do something else, hopefully in the game, but I didn't know. So that was great to say. And then we got to the decision to let Clint go. And I struggled with it because we preached family. All we talked about was family. And here we are letting a person go that represented everything that was right in our organization. And I felt like I should have walked out the door with him. And I didn't have the courage to do that as a leader. I was scared. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to feed my family. I didn't have enough money put aside to live my life and freedom to make that decision. And it was the hardest thing I've done to this day. And it's the thing that I still feel incredibly guilty about, because when you're family building something, I was as much at fault for the things that had gone wrong in the '08 season, in '09, going into the start of '09, as anything Clint had done. And yet I didn't have the courage, and my journey in faith wasn't mature enough to the point to understand that I could venture into anything. And if I trust God, that was going to work out in the long run. And so that was by far for me, because it took a relationship that meant everything to me. And I just wished I had the courage to say, hey, if Clint's going to be let go, I think I should go with him, because ultimately at the end of the day, we're family, we're in this together, and I should have walked out the door with him. And so I learned a valuable lesson in my life that through that is understanding is that, integrity is not revolving. It's something you got to show up every day. And when you're faced with moments of making tough decisions, you've always got to do what the right thing is to do, no matter what the consequences may be. And in that moment in time, I'm not sure that I did. And I've never told Clint that, quite honestly, until today. But that was by far the toughest decision I've ever had to make in my professional career. Mm. And I didn't leave after the '09 season, because Kelly McGregor came to me at the end of the year and said he was leaving to take a job at the Blue Jays. Just when I was about to tell him I was leaving, he asked me for breakfast downtown. And so at breakfast, I was going to tell him I was leaving. And he told me he was leaving to take a job as the president of Rogers Sports and Communication. So I didn't leave. And then Kelly tragically passed away that April 20th of 2010. And I didn't even know what to do at that point in time. But I literally felt like I stayed at the Rockies 5 to 6 years longer than I should have, because I think all of those jobs have expiration dates. And Walt and Clint, I didn't feel guilty that, because I knew Clint was going to be fine. I had talked to enough people in the game that I knew Clint was going to get another chance to manage in the big leagues again, away from Coors Field, which I felt would have been so good for his career. But it really had nothing to do with that. It had to do with everything about what a relationship should represent. So anyway, I'll shut up now.
Well, Dan, thanks for sharing that. I had not heard the depth of the story. I think, you and I have rewatched the videotape as that thing unfolded in '09. And when you love somebody, I can remember when Dan called me that morning. It's an off day. Your general manager calls you at 7:30 in the morning. That's usually not a good sign, but sometimes it can be sometimes it can be an injury. Sometimes it can be something else. But he said, I need you to come over to the house. And I said, yep, okay, I'll get over there. And I told Carl I'm heading over. I'll probably come back not as the manager of the Colorado Rockies. You know what? Whatever happens is going to be okay. So I went over. When Dan looked at the door and I could see those eyes, I do believe the first thing I said to him, so I guess we're not here to discuss where I'm going to hit Tulowitzki tonight in the lineup. Just trying to lighten the mood up, because I didn't know how heavy of a burden it was for him. I knew how hard the season had gotten for us. I knew what we had been through. I've been fired 3 times. None of them would have I chosen to get fired when I did. But of the 3, this one probably had the most empathy tied to it, compassion tied to it in some areas than the other 2. The other 2 were cold, somewhat, they were different. They were way different. So I had been a family, and my kids had grown up there. Maddie and Christian had grown up there. Carl and I invested in the community. We lived there. All those things, they're rolling for such, I think it was 14 years we put in. And all of a sudden you leave your general manager's house, and you're going in a different direction. You don't even know where it is. But I just knew it was going to be okay. Dan and I, we can talk about our faith all day long and how it's grown, how it gets challenged, how, we try not to compromise it. We want to be men of, action and not just words. But I do know that day we did something together. I believe, Dan, were you a part of it when Kelly and I went up to his office? You guys let me go. We all prayed together, walking out the door. Come on.
Amazing.
I mean, I look back on that. Could I have done that? Anybody would have told me, son, you're going to get fired after this. 14 months after your team goes to the World Series, you're going to get whacked and told to move on. But you're going to go upstairs. You're going to pray with the 2 guys that are, two of the guys that decided that you're no longer needed. That's not of me. There's no way. And I was appreciative of the way or the opportunity I got. Dan believed in a guy when I'm not sure anybody else would. Kelly helped raise me in many ways like my father did. They were all different, but like a father would raise somebody. And he was 10 years younger than me, which is just that was hard to understand, how a guy younger, smarter, better looking, more gifts. I mean, he's mentoring an older guy like me each step of the way and doing it so well. So he poured into me. Dan poured into me. However, I think the biggest thing was, and I shared this actually in more detail when I was fired in Pittsburgh. Dan touched on it earlier. I came up with my own phrase through my firings: you honor the excellent. You honor the excellent. If while I'm manager of the Rockies for parts of 9 seasons, and we talk about family, we talk about cohesion, we talk about trust, integrity, character, selflessness, and then I go out yelling, screaming, pointing fingers, I got job, this, that, in 9 years of what it took to build, I could have torn it down in 5 minutes in a press meeting with somebody, spouting off the wrong things. I never was even entertained those thoughts. I needed to honor the excellent, the gifts that were given to me, the blessings that were given to me, my family, the position I was put in. I was in a much better position in life when I left the organization, when I was asked to leave it, than when I walked in. So many people in that organization made me better. So many people in that organization loved on my wife, on my kids, on our family. There were so many good things to reap from it. There was just time, you know what? Kelly shared this with me as well. And it was in a different context, but it's turned to play out very, very appropriately. As long as God wants you in that chair, Clint, no man can move you out. And when God doesn't want you in that chair, no man can keep you there. We were talking about something else. Little did I know that day I thought about that 27 times. I thought about it in Pittsburgh on the September 29th when I went out in 2019. It was time to move on. I believe I had served God's purpose for me in that chair as long as he wanted me there. And now it's time to move on to something different, because when I get to the point where I see God, he's not going to ask me how many wins and losses I had as a manager. He's going to say, son, what'd you do with the chair I gave for 17 years? What did you do with that chair? So, there couldn't be any kicking and screaming. I will say this. because I've had people say, this is really hard for me. I just want to let you guys know, when you fire a manager, it's never harder than it is on the manager.
Yeah.
The other way around.
Yeah.
But I've done it. I've done it with players. I've done it with coaches. So I've been in the same seat. It's not easy, but it is part of our journey, and it's part of our learning process. So, I'm still thankful for it.
So let's fast forward to today. I like to talk about how you guys both think about your life today, because you've led lives of influence. The decisions you made, you just talked about, had great impact on other people. Clint, you accomplished a lot. Both of you accomplished a lot. Dan, I know you're an amazing family man, and I love watching you on TV now. But you guys have talked about the fact that you're men of deep faith. So what's important to you today? How do you think about the second half of your life? Is there anything you still want to accomplish? And kind of what gets you up in the morning and inspires you every day now?
Well, I have to tell you, that's a real interesting question for me. Because when I left the Rockies at the end of 15, I knew that I was done. I mean, I already told you guys I was probably done a few years before that. It's so hard to go through 2 rebuilds within an organization, because it takes so much of everything you've got just to get through the first rebuild. Going through the next one in 2011, I mean, the battery was completely drained at that point in time. But quite honestly, Walt, when I left and I was fortunate enough to get the job at the network, which was a blessing, I thought that I would do that for a couple of years, recharge the batteries, do an autopsy on my 15 years, try to grow as much as I possibly can from that experience, and I'd be running the club again. Now, 8 years into the role, it's very obvious to me that has not happened for one of 2 reasons. I believe God doesn't answer prayer. One, he doesn't feel you're spiritually mature enough to handle the role. That, quite honestly, might still be the case. Or 2, that I think God speaks to us through open and closed doors. And I think he has decided to close that door. And I say to people all the time, because every time a job comes open, I have this small circle of people. Thank gosh Clint's not one of those, that'll reach out to me and go, you'd be perfect in that, whatever that role is. And then, I say to them, listen, if you have faith and you believe the sovereignty of God, you can't just believe in it when he answers your prayer. It's either you're all in and you're not. It's not, you can't sit on the fence and go, well, I don't agree with that decision. You have to accept the inevitability of the choices that he makes for you in life, because he knows more than what you do. But I would say I am still a work in progress with all of that as I journey into this, I'm, round in second, headed to third, and probably at third for all intents and purposes. I'd say that's still a daily struggle for me to figure out if there's something more that God wants me to do than where he's got me planted to do right now.
Clint, how about you?
Well, in complete transparency, Dan, I never reached out to you, but I reached out to a lot of other people on a couple of occasions to bang the drum on your behalf. In all transparency, when you love somebody, you wish good things for them. Sometimes you don't know the definition of good is.
Right.
I would love to see Dan get another opportunity in the game, just because of the things he just mentioned. Lessons learned, experience gained, time off, different insight. There's a lot of smart people on TV that talk about baseball. There's probably more that are smart asses that talk about baseball. Dan shares wisdom. Dan shares authenticity. He's one of the few guys, when he comes on, I will stay on and watch. I don't watch a lot of the MLB network. I just don't have time, really. That's not a part of my daily, plug-in. But when I see Dan on, or I can remember in Pittsburgh walking by a TV and Dan was on, I stopped. And they would ask me. I said, because I know the man. And I learned from the man. I learned from Dan while I was in Pittsburgh, watching him on the TV sometimes. I still learn from Dan today. I watched Dan honor his daughter at a wedding a couple of years ago in a way that put tears in my eyes. I watched that family, spend a week together. That was just a joy to see, because as many blessings that come with our jobs, they're also hard jobs. and there's things we miss, and there's things we can't recreate. So I love the fact that the man I see now, yeah, he is where his feet are now. And I do believe with all my heart that, God's plan is way better than mine. He continues to show me that every day. I am just trying to find a way, and I use this phrase because I mean it, to try and make a difference. Some way, somehow, somewhere. I work 2 weeks a month for Billy Schmidt and the Rockies now. I go back, I travel the minor leagues, I look at our players, I spend time with the managers and coaches. It's the way we drew it up. It's the way I feel I can be impactful and influential, growing boys into men, growing men into leaders, sharing some experience, strength, and hope along the way. I'm still learning. I've got kids now that I talk to on a ball field that could be my grandkids, just with the age difference. I'm 66. I'm talking to I got a 19-year-old player I talked to last week. I'm looking at this and go, this is great. My son's 19, but grandkids. And they look at me, and the funny thing is, some of them, they don't even know who I am, which is probably the biggest blessing of it all, because I actually get to build a relationship from scratch. Mm-hmm. They don't know.
Yeah.
And basically, it goes back to those 3 questions. Once I can show them that I'm interested in them, and I care about them, and I can make them better, if I can earn some trust, that's when the magic starts. But we've both been blessed with wonderful wives. We've both been blessed with kids that have accomplished well. My son, we're here in Hyde Park, New York. He's going to the Culinary Institute of America. Son's going to grow up to be a chef. So the 2 biggest blessings my son's given me, he picked 3 sports. Well, he's picked tennis, he's picked karate, and he's picked crew for the sports he was involved in growing up. He retired from baseball at the age of 4, and he was a man of his word. He never looked back. I've never been able to second guess one of his coaches, and I've never been able to overcoach my kid because I don't know enough about what he's doing. I don't know tennis, I don't know karate, and I sure as heck don't know crew. So I've just been hanging out, and I've been following my wife's lead, because my wife is the most patient, caring, trusting person that I know, and she's got a backbone that's real, and she's helped me navigate a lot of my waters. So I'm trying to be a much better man at home when I'm home, and I'm home more now than I was, but I'm still just trying to be open to what God wants next for me to do and be receptive to that. And really, outside of that, I'm blessed. I'm very thankful for this opportunity, Walt. I think a lot of you, but I've let Dan know this a few times. And it's not anything but what you should tell somebody that you feel indebted to. Dan gave me a shot. It was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. I didn't see it coming. The funniest story we've talked about, when he came to my condo that morning, I thought he was coming to fire me. I had told my dad, we had conversations about meeting, and it just didn't work, or I was probably partially trying to dodge it because we were terrible. We weren't hitting. We weren't terrible. We just weren't playing well. We weren't hitting. And, somebody's going to go. And I can remember when we finally got together, Dan said, I need to get over to your house early this morning. I said, okay. I called my dad. I said, Dad, I think he's coming over to fire me. My dad goes, what? He goes, come to your house? I go, yeah, Dad, it's kind of cool because I won't have to take the walk of shame out of the clubhouse, packing a bag in front of everybody. I'll go get it when they go on the road or whatever. And when Dan dropped that on me, I can tell you it's been one of the maybe 2 or 3 moments of my life where my heart was literally beating outside my body when he asked me if I would consider to be the manager of the team. Not many people do those things for you in the course of a lifetime. And that question right there, when he asked me, that has helped transform my life in a trajectory, in a direction that only could have come from God, and with Dan's blessing.
So you guys, you've kind of touched on this last question, but I ask all my guests, and so I'll be a little bit more direct. I just think having an attitude of gratitude is so important in life. Just going about life with the glass half full, not half empty. I encourage people to do that all the time. So I just do want to ask you both, what opportunity has baseball given you that you're most grateful for? Or perhaps there's a person in baseball that influenced you that you're most grateful for? And I'll end with this question. And Dan, I'll start with you on that.
Gosh, Walt, I don't know if it's one thing. I think the game has given me everything. It's giving me It's given me joy, and it's given me the greatest amount of struggle I could possibly ever imagine, which has now given me a complete understanding of why I should have on a daily basis the attitude of gratitude. I remember. I don't honestly, Walt. I don't remember any of the wins and losses. Maybe a few, but I just remember the people and the relationships. And I mean, really, in Cleveland, it was John Hart, and Colorado was Kelly McGregor and Clint Hurdle. I mean, there's not many of them that have been transformational, but the ones that have been, changed my life completely. So it's the people.
Love it. Clint, how about you?
Well, I've shared my thoughts and my heartfelt thoughts with Dan, and with you, Walt. But Kelly McGregor probably grabbed me at a pivotal point in time in Colorado. I'm a flawed human being, and I've shared this with anybody. It's no secret. I'm 24 years sober, and I've been married 3 times. And Kelly sat me down one day and said, "You know what we're going to do? We're going to start taking walks once a week." It was the off season. And I wanted to say, well, this is Colorado. It's going to get pretty freaking cold here sooner or later. So walk around the block, I don't know if that's in our best interest. Kelly said, "No, we're going to take a walk. We're going to spend some time together. If it gets too cold, we'll just go in a coffee shop." That's one thing Kelly and I had no problem doing, was drinking coffee. But he just sat me down. He's the second most influential man in my life outside my father. And just said, what kind of man do you want to be? And I've heard you made some life changes, because I was just in the process of, getting my life, getting sober, establishing a better marriage relationship, being a father. The best version of me is what it came down to. And this was a guy that basically asked me those hard questions and kind of became my accountability partner, that we revisited the questions, and we had exercises we would do together, and we would do a one up, one down, one good thing that happened this week and one hard thing that happened this week, and we would share them, what we could learn from them. But he actually took me on that journey, which became a spiritual path as well, that really helped me figure out my why, my purpose, and the direction that I needed to follow. And, I needed to put God first, and I needed to put my family second. My sobriety needed to fit in there as well. But his point always kept coming back to be the man that God wants you to be. And, you got to use your ears and your eyes for that, not so much your mouth. So he would be the guy that I would go to this day. Not many days go by where I still don't think about him. I try and honor him in different ways. Sometimes people know I'm honoring, and sometimes they don't. But I can remember the visits. Dan made a bunch. And I don't know if anybody made more than to visit my daughter, Maddie, when she was first born and diagnosed with birth defect. That was one thing Kelly could do. Kelly could spend time at a hospital. If we had a player, a coach, anybody, he would go by himself. To this day, he used to challenge Maddie up in Breckenridge when we get together to go down the big slide inside. He put his hands up. 10 slides. You got to walk all the way up there, Maddie. You got to go down. You got to do it 10 times for me. 10 times. I'm just watching him do it. Well, she started calling him 10. Here comes 10. Hey, I want to say hello, 10. 10 this, 10 that. We go back to McGregor Square on a family vacation a month and a half ago. And after we check into the Raleigh Hotel, Maddie says the first thing she wants to do is go outside and get her picture taken with 10. There's a plaque honoring Kelly outside. I mean, it kind of sums it all up. Right behind that, though, I'll tell you some of the best times we had. I'm gonna be quiet after this, but we used to go over to the O'Dowd's house for Halloween for I don't know how many years, and dress up, and it was some of the best Halloweens ever to see Dan's family, my family, our little kids dressing up, his kids dressing up, the wives together. We'd always walk the O'Dowd's neighborhood because it was a way better neighborhood than when I lived in. The candy bars were the big, real candy bars.
Yeah, Walt lives in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I do.
I mean,
yeah, but Clint's costumes are legendary in our neighborhood.
But those are the things you hold on to.
You may have got a candy bar at our house, Clint.
Yeah.
But those are
No,
those
you
are
would have
things we
remembered. He was dressed up like Shrek. You would have remembered that one.
Oh, that's great. But you know what, Clint? It boils down to showing you care, right?
Yeah, it's gratitude. It's
You
being
describe,
thankful.
Kelly, it's just all about, showing you care. And I just want you guys to know that I'm really grateful that you guys are both on today. And I just want to thank you so much for being here. I mean, this has been absolutely fabulous. And I thank you, Dan, I thank you for your vulnerability. And Clint, I love the stories. And I thank you, for talking about trust, the importance of trust, and all those things are all so important in our lives, and especially as we look to lead other people. So thank you guys for being on. And I'd like to thank all of you who are watching today, who made the decision to join us today. And I'd just like to tell you that you should keep an eye out for future Off the Rak interviews, and check out my LinkedIn newsletter, which is called Off the Rak Plus, where you can find previous episodes just like this, resources, transcripts, and more. And next month, we're going to have Steve White on the show. Steve is currently the president and special counsel to the CEO of Comcast. He recently wrote a great leadership book called Uncompromising. He is terrific. I don't think you're going to want to miss that. So if you can be on that next show, it'd be great. And until then, I just encourage all of you to be human and to find a positive influence on somebody around you each and every day. Thank you again for being on. And thank you, Clint and Dan, for being on again today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walt. Love you guys.
Love you guys.